Echo 7.
August 9th, 2019. Southern Italy. 8:50 in the morning. A man dials the emergency line. He gives the dispatcher his name. He spells it for her. He tells her he has fallen. He tells her both of his legs are broken. He tells her he is bleeding and cannot move. The line stays open for 7 minutes. The dispatcher hears him breathing. Then the call ends. 9 days later, a search dog finds him at the bottom of a ravine. The body is roughly 1.25 miles from the cliff where he made the call. The ravine is inside the search zone. Helicopters had flown over that section of coastline at least 3 times. They had not seen him. The terrain had hidden him in plain sight. He had told them. They had not heard. His name was Simon Gautier. He was 27 years old. He is the first case to remember because he is the clearest case in this investigation. He left a coordinate before he disappeared. A precise one, a voiced one, a recorded one. And the most developed civil protection system in Southern Europe could not convert that coordinate into a rescue. He is also not alone. He is one of 10 people in 10 countries on 4 continents over the past several years who all did the same thing in different ways. A phone call, a photograph from a summit, a morning departure logged by hotel staff, a car parked at a trailhead, a drop-off at the side of a highland road, a planned route shared with friends, a ticket scanned at the base of a Japanese ropeway. In every case, the world knew where they were before they vanished. In every case, knowing was not enough. I am Echo 7, and what follows is a record of 10 countries, 10 landscapes, and 10 people who told someone exactly where they were going. This investigation is built on incident reports, coroner findings, prosecutor statements, and public records requests filed in 8 separate jurisdictions across 4 continents. Some procedural details have been adjusted where official files remain partially sealed, and where surviving families requested that specific identifying information be withheld. Names and locations of the missing have been kept as they appear in the public record. Everything you are about to hear is documented. None of it is fiction. All of it is, in the literal sense of the word, on file. The cases span just over a decade. They cross Italy, France, Spain, Greece, Germany, Switzerland, Scotland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. The terrain ranges from coastal limestone cliffs to alpine snowfields, from temperate rainforest to volcanic ridge. The people range in age from 20 to 60. They were students, scientists, engineers, retirees, athletes, casual walkers. None of them were lost in the way the word is usually used. Each of them was, at the moment they disappeared, locatable. Each of them had transmitted, in some form, a fix on their position. And in every single case, the gap between that fix and the moment they were found, or the moment the search was called off, is something no formal review has fully explained. The pattern is not in the landscape. The pattern is in the silence between the last known signal and what came after it. Let me begin with Simon. Not because his case is the strangest, because it is the clearest, and because the clarity is itself the most damning evidence in this entire investigation. Simon was a French citizen, an art history doctoral student at the Sorbonne, living in Rome for his research. He had spent years walking the trails of southern Italy, learning the coastline of Campania, the way a scholar learns a manuscript, slowly and by repetition. On the 8th of August, he set out alone, on foot, into the Cilento e Vallo di Diano National Park, planning a multi-day route along the Mediterranean cliffs between the villages of San Giovanni a Piero and Marina di Camerota. He told friends his itinerary. He had water. He had food. He had a working mobile phone with a charged battery. By any reasonable definition, he had done everything a solo walker is told to do. The next morning, at 8:52, he made the call. The dispatcher who took it was trained in standard Italian emergency protocol. The recording, which was later partially released to investigators, captured a man speaking clear French-accented Italian. He said he had fallen. He said he had been falling for a long time, meaning the descent had been steep. He said both legs were broken. He said he was conscious. He said he could see no one. He gave his name. He spelled it. The call lasted approximately 7 minutes before the line ended. What happened next is the subject of a parliamentary inquiry in Italy. The dispatcher, following protocol, requested his coordinates. Simon could not provide them. He had a phone, but he was not using a GPS app at that moment, and the geolocation system feeding into Italian 112 in August of 2019 did not yet have advanced mobile location, the technology that automatically pushes a caller's precise GPS coordinates to the dispatcher. Italy had not yet implemented it. What the dispatcher received instead was a cell tower triangulation, an estimate based on which masts his phone was registered with. That estimate placed Simon somewhere inside a polygon covering several square miles of cliff and ravine. Several square miles. That is the number that should stay with you. In a coastal area, with vertical drops, with thick Mediterranean scrub, with caves and gullies and overhangs. The search began almost immediately. The Italian Coast Guard mobilized helicopters. The Carabinieri sent ground teams. Volunteers arrived from the surrounding villages. Drones were brought in. Cadaver dogs were brought in. A naval helicopter equipped with thermal imaging conducted multiple sweeps. Boats searched the coast from the water. The search lasted 9 days. Let me slow down on the technology question because it matters for the larger pattern. The system that Italian 112 used in 2019 to locate mobile callers was based on what engineers call cell ID, sometimes combined with timing advance and signal strength measurements from multiple towers. When you call from a mobile phone, the network knows which cell tower is handling the call. The size of the cell varies. In urban Rome, a cell might cover a few city blocks. In rural Cilento, a single cell can cover 6 miles of cliff and forest. The triangulation, when it is possible, narrows that down based on signal strength to neighboring towers. In a coastal area with limited tower density, the triangulation is, at best, approximate. At worst, it gives a search area larger than what a helicopter can fully inspect in a day. Advanced mobile location, which the European Union began promoting around 2015, solves this problem from the device side. When a caller dials an emergency number, a compatible smartphone activates its own GPS chip, gathers precise coordinates, and transmits them to the emergency service automatically as a text message in parallel with the voice call. Accuracy is typically within 30 to 70 feet. The technology had been in use in the United Kingdom since 2016. By 2019, when Simon called from the Cilento, several European countries had implemented it. Italy had not. The technology existed. The Italian system had not yet adopted it. The parliamentary briefing that followed the Gautier case quoted from technical reviews. The reviews stated that, had AML been operational, Simon's coordinates would likely have been on the dispatcher's screen within 30 seconds of his call. The search would have begun with a fix accurate to within a few yards, not a few miles. The helicopter would have flown directly to the gully. The recovery time, the reviewers estimated, would have been hours, not days. Whether he would have survived the injuries, no one can say with certainty. The autopsy indicated he had likely lived for at least some portion of the search period. A faster recovery might have changed the outcome. The technology to make it faster existed. It was not in place where he was. For those 9 days in August, in southern Italy, when daytime temperatures on those cliffs regularly exceed 93 degrees Fahrenheit, a young man with 2 broken legs and significant blood loss lay somewhere inside a polygon that the search teams could not narrow. He may have been alive for some portion of that period. The autopsy could not determine the exact moment of death with certainty, only that he had survived the initial fall, and that the cause of death was hemorrhagic shock from his injuries combined with dehydration. Here is what matters about the recovery itself. The geography of where the body was found, about 1.25 miles in straight-line distance from a section of cliff that had been overflown by helicopter at least 3 times during the search. Not a far distance by any measure. The terrain concealed him. The light angles concealed him. The vegetation concealed him. The shape of the gully concealed him. 9 days, with everything modern search infrastructure can offer, and the body was in a place that had already been looked at, multiple times, from above. His father, in an interview given to a French newspaper several weeks after the recovery, said that the family had not yet received a complete account of why the search had not found his son sooner. He said that the Italian authorities had been respectful, had been thorough in the conversations after the recovery, had been willing to answer questions, but that the answers always came back to the same core fact. The technology had not been adequate. The terrain had hidden him. The protocol had done what the protocol could do. The father said in that interview that he did not blame any individual searcher. He blamed the gap between what the system promised and what the system delivered. He said the promise was made every time a citizen learned to dial 112. The promise was that if you call, you will be heard, and if you are heard, you will be found. The first half of the promise was kept. The second half was not. The parliamentary inquiry that followed produced several recommendations. Italy accelerated the implementation of advanced mobile location after this case. The protocols for handling emergency calls from hikers were revised. The family of Simon Gautier, through their lawyer in Rome, asked one question that the inquiry never answered to their satisfaction. They asked how it was possible, in a country with one of the most developed civil protection systems in Europe, that a man who told emergency services where he was and that he was dying could not be found in time. What the evidence tells me is not that the system failed in some abstract way. The system worked exactly as designed. The problem is that the design assumed something it should not have. It assumed that if you have a phone signal, you can be located. It assumed that if you can be located within a few square miles, you can be found within those miles in a reasonable amount of time. Both assumptions are wrong, and the case of Simon Gautier is the proof. You can be on the line with a dispatcher who knows your name and still be invisible from the air. You can be conscious and still be unreachable. The signal you send is not the same as the rescue you receive. That gap is where Simon died. And as you will see, in every case that follows, that gap takes a different shape, but it is always there. Esther Dingley had been on the road for 6.5 years. She and her partner, a man named Daniel Colgate, had given up their conventional careers in 2014 to live in a converted van, moving across Europe, taking long mountain treks, documenting their travels online. By November of 2020, Esther was 37, and she was widely regarded among the community of long-distance European hikers as both highly experienced and unusually cautious. She did not take unmarked routes alone. She always told Daniel where she was going. That month, she set out for a solo ridge walk in the Pyrenees on the French-Spanish border, from the Refuge de Venasque on the French side. The plan was a short route. She would summit Pic de Sauvegarde, a peak rising to roughly 8,900 feet, and return the same day. The weather was cold, but stable. She had appropriate winter gear. She had her phone. She had told Daniel exactly when she expected to be back at the refuge. At approximately 4 in the afternoon on the 22nd of November, she reached the summit. We know this because she sent Daniel a selfie. The image is now well known to European search and rescue analysts. It shows Esther smiling in a red jacket with the surrounding peaks behind her, all white with fresh snow. The metadata on the photograph confirms the location and the time. She wrote a short message. "Cold up here. Heading back down now. Love you." That was the last anyone heard from her. When she did not return to the refuge that evening, Daniel raised the alarm. The Pyrenees Mountain Rescue, the French Peloton de Gendarmerie de Haute Montagne, the Spanish Guardia Civil Mountain Unit, and volunteer teams from both sides of the border launched a coordinated search. Helicopters flew sweeps over both faces of the ridge. Drones with thermal imaging covered the standard descent routes. Trained mountain dogs searched the lower slopes. The search continued for weeks before deep winter conditions forced a suspension. Esther was not found that winter. The case became one of the most prominent missing persons investigations in Western Europe in recent memory, in part because of the public profile she and Daniel had built, and in part because the circumstances did not match the usual profile of a lost hiker. She was experienced. She had communicated. She had been at a known location at a known time. The descent from Pic de Sauvegarde, by the standard route, is not technical. Hundreds of people make that walk every season. In July of 2021, 8 months after her disappearance, a fragment of human bone was found by a couple walking near Porte de la Glaire, a pass on the Spanish side of the ridge. The Spanish Guardia Civil recovered the area. Further remains were found. Dental analysis confirmed the identity. The remains were Esther's. What is striking, and what the French prosecutor noted in his statement to the press, is the location. The bones were found significantly off the standard descent route. Esther had, at some point on her return from the summit, deviated. She had gone down a slope that was not the one she had come up. The terrain there is steep, broken by small cliffs, and in November of 2020 was partially snow-covered. The prosecutor's conclusion, after reviewing the evidence, was that the most likely scenario was a fall, a loss of footing on icy ground, a slide, a drop. He stopped short of calling it definitive. He said the evidence supported accident as the leading hypothesis. He did not say the case was solved. The family accepted the finding. Daniel said in a statement that he believed Esther had been killed quickly, that she had not suffered. He may be right. There is no way to know. But look at the same set of facts I am looking at. A woman with a known summit position, a known time, a known direction of travel, 8 months of organized search across 2 countries, including aerial sweeps with thermal imaging, ground teams, and dogs. And the remains were found by chance, by hikers, in a location that was inside the broader search zone, not in some distant valley, inside the area that had been looked at. The system worked. The search was professional. The technology was used. And it still took 8 months and a coincidence for her to be found at all. The Dingley case deserves more time because the public record around it is unusually detailed, and the details matter for the larger pattern. The selfie that Esther sent at 4 in the afternoon on the summit of Pic de Sauvegarde was one of 17 photographs she took that day, according to the metadata recovered from her phone records and from images she had previously sent her partner. The ascent had been steady. The weather, by her own description in the early morning, was clear, but cold. There was fresh snow on the higher slopes, the result of a storm system that had passed through the Pyrenees in the previous 48 hours. She had crampons. She had an ice axe. She had a rope, though she was not using it on the route she had chosen, which did not require technical climbing. The selfie itself, when published in the British press during the search, showed something that experienced mountain walkers picked up on immediately. The light on Esther's face was a particular kind of late afternoon light, low in the sky, casting long shadows. The peaks behind her were already in shade on their east faces. The descent she would now begin was, by the geometry of the November sun in that latitude, going to be made into shadow. The temperature, which had been just below freezing at the summit, would drop further as she descended into the colder valley air. The snow she had crossed on the ascent, partially soft in the afternoon, would refreeze and become harder to walk on as the sun fell. These are the conditions in which experienced mountain walkers, even very experienced ones, occasionally make decisions that look, in retrospect, like the wrong decisions. They take a shortcut. They cut down a slope that looks shorter than the marked route. They trust their footing on a surface that has just begun to change character. A single misstep on icy ground, on a slope that drops away below, becomes a slide. The slide becomes a fall. The fall ends somewhere out of sight from the route they should have been on. The French prosecutor's report, which I read in the original, was meticulous about what could and could not be determined from the remains. Soft tissue degradation over 8 months in alpine conditions had eliminated the possibility of determining a precise time of death. The position of the bones, scattered by animal activity over the months, could not be used to reconstruct an exact body position at the time of injury. The most that could be said was that the location was consistent with a fall from a higher slope, and that the injuries visible on the bones, including a fractured skull, were consistent with a high-impact trauma compatible with a fall. The prosecutor's conclusion, after several months of investigation, including interviews with Daniel Colgate and with other long-distance walkers who had crossed paths with Esther and Daniel in earlier weeks, was that there was no evidence of foul play, no evidence of suicide, and that the accident hypothesis remained the most strongly supported by the physical evidence. He used the French phrase, "La vie accidentelle reste la plus probable." The accident hypothesis remains the most probable. He did not say it was the only possible explanation. He said it was the most probable. What is striking, and what Daniel Colgate has spoken about publicly in the years since, is that the 8 months of not knowing changed everything about how the family experienced the loss. For the first 6 weeks, there was active search. For the next 4 months, there was a winter pause in which no search could proceed safely. For the 2 months after that, there was renewed search in better weather. 8 months total, during which Esther was somewhere on a mountain that the family could see on a map but could not enter. The search itself, even when active, was not always visible. There were weeks in which Daniel would learn only after the fact that a particular ridge had been swept, that a particular gully had been checked. The communication between the family and the various authorities was, by Daniel's own account, generally good, but the underlying experience was one of waiting in the absence of information, for a duration that no preparation can compress. The remains were found by 2 hikers walking the ridge in mid-July. They saw bone fragments in a scree slope at approximately 8,000 feet elevation. They marked the location. They reported it. The Spanish Guardia Civil Mountain Rescue Team came in by helicopter. The recovery took several days. Dental records confirmed the identity within hours of the comparison. Daniel was informed in late July. He flew to the Pyrenees. He spent time at the location. In a statement he made the following month, Daniel said that he believed Esther had died very quickly. He said that this was a comfort to him. He may be right. There is no way to know with certainty. The bones do not tell that story. Keep both of these cases in your mind as the same kind of fact, even though they look different. In Italy, a man on the phone, 9 days to a body. In the Pyrenees, a woman with a time-stamped selfie, 8 months to bones. In both cases, the searchers knew where to look. In both cases, looking there did not work. The case of Natalie Christopher complicates the pattern in a particular way because of how short the distance was. Natalie was 35 years old in August of 2019. She was a Cypriot national, an astrophysicist with a doctorate from the University of Hertfordshire, working at the Las Cumbres Observatory Network. Her colleagues described her as meticulous. The word that comes up in their statements is methodical. She measured. She kept records. She was, by her profession and by her habits, the opposite of a careless person. She was on holiday in Greece with her partner. They had chosen Ikaria, an island in the eastern Aegean, known for its hiking trails and its calm. They were staying at a small family hotel called Akti Ayegu in the village of Cremer on the northern coast of the island. Natalie was, by all accounts, in good health and good spirits. At approximately 7 in the morning on the 5th of August, she left the hotel for a run. The staff saw her leave. She was dressed in running clothes. She did not take a backpack. She did not say she was going far. The road outside the hotel runs east along the coast, with hillside above and the sea below, and a series of small tracks branching off into the dry hills that rise behind Karami. The terrain is what Greek hikers call savato, loose rock, dry grass, scattered carob and olive, ravines cutting down toward the sea. She did not come back for breakfast. By mid-morning, her partner was concerned. By midday, he had contacted the local police. The Greek authorities responded with what, by their standards, was an immediate and large-scale operation. The fire brigade, the Coast Guard, drones, helicopters, divers searching the coastal waters in case she had gone for a swim, volunteers from the village, sniffer dogs flown in from Athens. By the second day, more than 50 people were involved in active search. Local fishermen took their boats along the coast looking for any sign. On the 7th of August, 2 days after she left the hotel, her body was found by volunteers in a ravine. The location was approximately 1,000 feet from the road she had presumably been running along, less than half a mile from the hotel itself. In a direct line, you could see from the place she was found to the upper floors of the building, where she had slept the night before. The coroner determined that she had fallen. The injuries were consistent with a drop of approximately 65 feet into the ravine. She had likely died on impact, or within a very short time after. There was no evidence of foul play. The Greek authorities closed the case as an accidental death. Hold that image. A woman who left a building at 7 in the morning. A woman whose route was, in the broadest possible sense, known. She was going to run somewhere along the coast road. The fact that she had gone is known. The time is known. The clothes she was wearing are known. The hotel staff confirmed her departure, and the search, which began within hours, did not find her until 48 hours later, in a place that was within visual distance of the building she had left. Why? The terrain. The ravine ran perpendicular to the road, hidden by scrub and rock formations. From the road itself, you could not see into it. From the air, the angle of the morning light, combined with the dry vegetation, made shadows that hid a human figure. Drones flew over the area. Helicopters flew over the area. She was not visible from above until volunteers, on foot, climbed down into specific gullies and looked. The lesson, which Greek mountain rescue teams now teach in their training, is what they call the proximity blindness problem. When a person is missing in a known area, search teams instinctively expand outward. They assume the person has traveled. They search wider, not closer. The default behavior of a search operation is to project the missing person away from the last known point, not into the immediate vicinity of it. And so the small ravines, the gullies, the dead spaces 1,000 feet from the road get searched last. By the time the searchers come back to look closely at what was right next to them, the person is already dead. This is not a Greek failure. It is not a Cilento failure. It is not a Pyrenees failure. It is the same failure in 3 different countries, in 3 different terrains, in 3 different decades. And as we continue, you will see it again, and the form will change, and the underlying shape will not. In June of 2023, a 31-year-old Belgian woman named Celine Cremer was traveling alone through the Australian state of Tasmania. She had come to Australia for a working holiday, the kind of extended trip that young Europeans take, moving from job to job, hostel to hostel, with months of unstructured exploration between. She loved walking. Her family in Belgium described her as someone who needed the outdoors the way other people need company. On the 17th of June, she drove a rented car into the northwest of Tasmania, a remote and densely forested part of the island, known as the Tarkin region. Her destination that day was the trailhead for Philosopher Falls, near the small mining settlement of Waratah. The Philosopher Falls walk is, by Tasmanian standards, a short and easy route, approximately 2.5 miles return, a maintained track, boardwalks over the wetter sections, a wooden viewing platform at the falls themselves. It is the kind of walk recommended to tourists. It is not technical. It is not exposed. It is, by every metric the Tasmanian Park Service uses, a low-risk destination. She parked her car at the trailhead and walked into the rainforest. She did not come out. Her car remained at the trailhead for several days. In rural Tasmania in winter, a parked car is not immediately alarming. Other walkers passed it. Park staff noted it. Eventually, her family in Belgium, alarmed that they had not heard from her in over a week, contacted the Belgian consulate, which contacted Australian authorities. By that point, Celine had been missing for approximately 12 days. The search that followed was substantial. Tasmania Police, State Emergency Service volunteers, specialist search and rescue teams, cadaver dogs, helicopters with thermal imaging, ground teams cutting transects through the rainforest. The Tarkin is, despite the short walk to the falls, surrounded by some of the most difficult terrain in Australia. Cool temperate rainforest, myrtle and leatherwood and sassafras growing in dense layers, moss thick enough to swallow a footprint, sphagnum bogs that pull a boot into the knee, light filters down through the canopy in patches. Rain falls every other day. For weeks, the search continued. On the 26th of July, more than a month after she had parked her car, a search dog alerted in a section of forest not far from the trail. The handlers followed. They found Celine's remains. The location, when it was made public, surprised even the experienced searchers. She was not deep in the wilderness. She was within walking distance of the marked track. The exact distance has been described in different reports as anywhere from a few hundred yards to a little over half a mile off the main path. She had, for reasons no one has been able to reconstruct, left the track. Whether intentionally, to take a photograph, to relieve herself, to explore a side route, or unintentionally because she had become disoriented, no one knows. There is no evidence of foul play. The Tasmanian coroner has not yet released a final determination. What the search and rescue teams have said publicly is that the area where she was found had been walked through by ground teams more than once during the active search. The dogs had not alerted on those earlier passes. The reasons are several. Rain washes scent. Dense vegetation traps and disperses it. Time degrades it. By the time the search began in earnest, weeks had already passed since Celine had stopped walking. By the time the search reached that particular section of forest, more weeks had passed. The forest does not preserve evidence. The forest erases it. I have stood at trailheads like the Philosopher Falls trailhead. Not that one specifically, but its equivalents in the Pacific Northwest, in Scotland, in the Carpathians. A small parking area, a wooden sign with a route description, an interpretive panel, a map. The visual message is always the same. This is a managed space. This is a tourist destination. This is safe. That message is a lie. Not in the sense that the trail itself is dangerous. The trail is not dangerous. The lie is in the implication that what surrounds the trail is also safe. The lie is in the suggestion that if you step off the path for a moment, the management of the space continues. It does not. 6 feet from the boardwalk in the Tarkine, you are in wilderness as serious as any unmanaged forest on Earth. The maintained walk is a thin line of human order. On either side of that line, the rules change instantly. Celine knew the woods. She had walked in Europe. She was not careless. What killed her was not carelessness. What killed her was the assumption, built into the design of modern tourist hiking, that the trail is a buffer. It is not a buffer. It is a vector. It takes you into the wild, and then it lets you go. When her car sat alone at that trailhead for 12 days before anyone became worried, the design failed. The signal she had left, the parked car, the rental record, the planned route logged with no one, was a signal that no one had been told to read. She had no scheduled check-in. She had no satellite beacon. She had no automated alert. The trailhead was, in the language of search and rescue, a passive location. Passive locations do not transmit. They wait. By the time the transmission reached anyone, she had already been silent for nearly 2 weeks. By the time the search reached the section of forest where she lay, she had been silent for over a month. The ground team that finally walked past her, with their dog, did so on a particular day, when the wind was right, and the moisture was right, and the dog was working at the right speed. If those variables had been different, she might not have been found at all. Consider now a case that, on its surface, looks like the opposite of Celine's. A man with a known itinerary, a well-trafficked trail, a search that began almost immediately, and the same kind of outcome. In the early summer of 2021, a 29-year-old man named Aidan Roche traveled from his home in Dublin to the Bernese Oberland region of Switzerland. He was an engineer. He had been working in Ireland and had taken time off to hike. He was experienced. He was not a casual tourist. He had told friends his planned route. He had told his family approximately when he would return. The trail he had chosen, the Eiger Trail, runs along the base of the famous Eiger North Face, from the Eigergletscher station to Alpiglen. It is not an alpine route. It is not climbing. It is a marked, well-used hiking path. In summer, hundreds of people walk it every day. Aidan walked into that valley on the 18th of June of 2021. He did not walk out. When he did not return to his accommodation, the alarm went up quickly. Swiss search and rescue is among the best resourced in the world. Rega, the air rescue service, mobilized helicopters within hours. The Bernese cantonal police launched ground teams. Mountain rescue specialists familiar with the Eiger area, men and women who knew every gully and every fall line on that face, were brought in. Search dogs were deployed. Drones with thermal imaging swept the slopes. The search in its first days was as comprehensive as any in the Alps. He was not found. The search continued for weeks. It scaled down. It became an intermittent effort. By August, with no new information, active operations had largely ceased. The case was being treated as a long-term missing person. On the 27th of September, 3 months and 9 days after he had disappeared, Aidan's body was found. The location was on a steep slope above the Eiger Trail. The recovery team was a small group operating in an area that had been included in the original search grid. Read that again. Inside the original search grid. The Swiss are not careless. They do not draw small grids. The original search had covered, in some form, the area where he was eventually found. They had looked. They had not seen him. A note on Rega specifically, because the institution itself is part of why this case is so striking. Rega, the Schweizerische Rettungsflugwacht, is a private, non-profit foundation funded primarily by membership donations from Swiss citizens. Over 3 million people in Switzerland are members. The organization operates a fleet of helicopters from bases across the country, with response times typically under 15 minutes from any populated area in the Alps. Rega crews include pilots, paramedics, and mountain rescue specialists. They train continuously. Their reputation, both inside and outside Switzerland, is that they are the standard against which other alpine rescue services are measured. When Rega does not find someone, it is not for lack of capability. It is because the terrain has hidden the person in a way that no helicopter operation can overcome. The Swiss authorities have not officially explained the cause of death of Aidan Roche. The location and the position of the body were consistent with a fall from above. The hypothesis is that Aidan had, for reasons unknown, left the marked Eiger Trail and ascended the slope above it, possibly attempting a shortcut, possibly attempting a higher viewpoint, possibly disoriented. At some point during that off-trail ascent, he had fallen. The terrain at the place of the fall was such that the body came to rest in a fold of rock that from above looked like nothing. From below, the angle of the cliff above hid the spot from anyone walking the trail itself. There is a specific phrase that Swiss mountain guides use for places like this. They call them Totwinkel, dead corners, spaces in the terrain that are invisible from every viewing angle that a passing searcher would naturally use. A dead corner can be small. It can be the size of a small room. It can hold a body for years without ever being seen, even by people walking past it 60 feet away. The Eiger has a number of dead corners. Every alpine face does. The trail beneath the Eiger has them. The slopes above the trail have them. The search teams know about them in principle, but in practice they cannot inspect every single one. There are too many. The cost in time, in helicopter hours, in personnel risk, is too high. There is a published study, prepared by alpine rescue researchers in the canton of Valais, that examined recovery cases in the Swiss Alps over a 15-year period. The study looked at how long it took, after a person was confirmed missing, before the body was located. The results showed 2 distinct categories. In the first category, recovery within 24 hours, the cases were typically falls on or very near a marked trail, in good visibility, with witnesses. In the second category, recovery taking weeks or months, the cases shared a different profile. They were almost always off-trail, in terrain features that the researchers classified as visually concealed. The study used a specific phrase. It said that the probability of detection within the first week of a search is heavily dependent on whether the body comes to rest in a position that is visible from a typical helicopter sweep altitude of 700 to 1,300 feet above ground. If the body is in a Totwinkel, the probability collapses. The helicopter passes over. The thermal imaging in daytime struggles against ambient ground temperature. The eye does not see. The terrain holds. What this case tells me is that the failure here is not a failure of effort. It is a failure of geometry. The Swiss did everything right. They had the resources. They had the training. They had the experience. The terrain still concealed him for 3 months. It concealed him in plain sight. In the area they had searched. In the area he was eventually found. Because the architecture of the rock face itself was uncooperative. When you start putting these cases next to each other, you stop being able to call them anomalies. Italy, Pyrenees, Greece, Tasmania, Switzerland. Different countries, different terrains, different agencies, different decades. The same shape repeats. The signal was given. The search was launched. The search worked. And the person was still found, when they were found at all, in a place that defied the search. In October of 2023, a 60-year-old Australian woman named Denise Ann Williams was on what was meant to be the trip of her life. She had traveled from Australia to eastern Canada to walk in the Cape Breton Highlands, a national park on the northern tip of Nova Scotia, famous among long-distance hikers for its coastal cliffs and its old-growth forests. She had rented a vehicle. She had a guidebook. She was, by her family's accounts, exactly the kind of careful older walker that experienced trail communities are full of. She had hiked in Tasmania, in New Zealand, in the Scottish Highlands. She knew what she was doing. On approximately the 19th of October, she drove to the Aegean trailhead on the western side of Cape Breton Highlands National Park. The Aegean Trail is a loop, roughly 5 miles in length, climbing through mixed Aegean forest to a viewpoint overlooking the Gulf of St. Lawrence. It is a moderate walk. In October, the leaves are turning, the light is low, and the trail can be wet, but not technical. She parked her rental car. She started walking. She did not return to the car. Her absence was noticed when she did not check in with family at her expected time. Within days, the search began. Parks Canada, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Civil Air Search and Rescue Association, and provincial ground search and rescue teams were all involved. The terrain in the Western Highlands is difficult. Coastal forest, steep ravines running down to the sea, dense undergrowth, mossy old growth where sound carries strangely. The weather in late October is unpredictable, cold, wet, wind off the Gulf. Helicopters flew. Ground teams cut transects through the forest. Trained dogs worked the trail. Coastal cliffs were searched by both ground and air teams. After 6 days of intensive search, the operation was scaled down. No body, no equipment, no clear trace beyond the parked rental car. The case remained, and remains, officially open. As far as I have been able to determine from public records and from Parks Canada statements, Denise has not been found. There is something specifically difficult about this case that distinguishes it from several of the others. In Italy and in Switzerland, a body was eventually recovered. In Greece and in Tasmania, a body was eventually recovered. The families had a place to grieve. They had a confirmation. The story, terrible as it was, had a final line. In Cape Breton, there is no final line. The car sits as evidence. The trailhead sign stands as evidence. The Australian government's missing person bulletin is updated and reissued. But the woman is gone. There is no body to bury. There is no narrative of how she died. There is only the gap between the moment she parked the car and now, and that gap has been silent for over 2 years. Think with me about what this means in the context of the pattern. In every case so far, the searchers knew where to begin. They had a fix. The car was the fix in Tasmania, and a body was eventually found near the trail. The car was the fix in Cape Breton, and nothing was found at all. The same kind of starting point, the same kind of search, 2 completely different outcomes. What this tells me is that the fix is not what determines whether you are found. The fix is necessary, but not sufficient. The other variables, the terrain, the weather, the time of year, the windows for search, the wind direction, the angle of the light, the moisture in the ground, the speed of the search teams, the depth of the canopy, the breed of dog, the experience of the handler, the resolution of the imaging, the height of the helicopter. All of these matter more than the fix itself. The fix tells you where to start. It does not tell you where to look, and the looking is where the system fails. Parks Canada has, to its credit, been honest about the limits. In public statements about the Williams case, officials acknowledge that even with all resources deployed in that terrain, at that time of year, the probability of finding a person who had moved even a short distance off trail was low. They did not say this to deflect blame. They said it as a matter of fact. The Cape Breton Highlands in October is a landscape that hides people. The volunteers who walk transects through that forest know this. They know that a person 50 feet off their line, behind a windfall or in a small depression, would be invisible to them. They walk anyway. Sometimes they find. Often, they do not. The honesty is appreciated. It does not, however, return Denise to her family. The fix she left, the car at the trailhead, was the strongest possible starting signal short of an emergency beacon, and the system, with all its modern resources, could not convert that signal into a recovery. That gap between signal and recovery is again the thing to hold in your mind. It is the pattern that recurs. The next case takes us to a different climate entirely, and to a different category of failure. Not the failure of methodology, not the failure of equipment, the failure of time itself. In January of 2024, a young Israeli woman named Tevel Shabtai traveled to the northern Japanese island of Hokkaido. She was, by Israeli standards, an experienced traveler. She had served in the army, as nearly all young Israelis do, and after her service, she had spent time abroad, including in countries where solo travel demands a certain self-reliance. She was in her early 20s. She loved snow. She had come to Japan specifically for the winter season. Her destination on the day she disappeared was Mount Asahi, known in Japanese as Asahi Dake, the highest peak on Hokkaido at roughly 7,500 feet. Asahi Dake is an active volcano. In summer, its slopes are walked by thousands of casual hikers. In winter, it is something else entirely. Winds reach speeds that knock a standing person off their feet. Temperatures fall well below -4 Fahrenheit. Snow accumulates in depths measured in yards. Whiteout conditions can erase visibility in minutes. The peak is, in January, among the more serious winter environments in East Asia. Tevel set out from the Asahi Dake ropeway, the cable car that lifts visitors to a station partway up the slope, on a day when the conditions were, by local guide assessment, marginal, but not closed. She was equipped for winter walking. The ropeway operators logged her ascent on the morning ticket scanner. She told no one her exact intended summit attempt versus a shorter walk. She went up alone. She didn't come back down. The alarm was raised on the evening of the same day. The ropeway operators, following standard procedure when a log descent is not matched by a descent before the last ride down, contacted the Higashikawa town office, which in turn contacted the Hokkaido Regional Police. By 8 in the evening, the case had been escalated to the Mountain Rescue Unit. The first attempt to search the upper station that night was abandoned within minutes. The winds at the ropeway top platform were measured by the operators at 50 miles per hour, with stronger gusts. No team in any country can search a snowfield in that wind. They went down. They waited. The next morning, conditions improved enough for a partial deployment. The Asahi Dake rescue team, supplemented by personnel from the Higashikawa Fire Department and by members of the Daisetsuzan Winter Mountaineering Club, ascended the ropeway and began a search of the standard summer trail corridor between the upper station and the summit. The corridor in summer is marked by yellow steel poles set every 50 yards. In January, those poles are partially buried in snow. The team followed the poles up. They found nothing. They came back down. The afternoon weather closed in again. The search stood down. This is the pattern that defined the next 4 days. Morning ascent during weather windows, afternoon retreat. Repeat. By the third day, helicopter sweeps from a Hokkaido regional rescue base became possible. The helicopter flew low over the southern and eastern slopes, the most likely areas a solo walker without technical equipment would attempt. Nothing. By the fourth day, sniffer dogs trained for avalanche victim recovery were brought up by ropeway and worked the lower slopes. Nothing. On the fifth day, a team of 2 volunteer mountaineers, working independently of the official operation but in coordination with it, ascended along a less standard line and located Tevel in a small hollow approximately 400 yards off the summer trail corridor on a southwest-facing slope. She had not summited. She had not reached the marked turnaround point. She had stepped off the trail line at some point during her ascent, possibly because the markers were obscured by drifting snow, possibly because of disorientation in low visibility. The medical examination performed in Asahikawa confirmed that she had died of exposure within hours of leaving the trail corridor. The cold had moved faster than any search could have. Slow down with me on what that means in practical terms, because the math of winter survival is not generally understood by walkers who have not faced it. In conditions of moving air at 5 degrees Fahrenheit, with sustained winds of 30 miles per hour or higher, the effective temperature on exposed skin drops to something in the range of 30 to 40 degrees below zero. A healthy adult, well-dressed in winter gear, can maintain core body temperature in those conditions for perhaps 2 to 4 hours of continuous movement. Once movement stops, whether because of injury, exhaustion, or disorientation, the survival window collapses to roughly 1 to 2 hours. Hypothermia sets in. Cognitive function degrades. Decision-making fails. The person stops being able to help themselves. They become, in the language of mountain rescue, a passive subject. And a passive subject in winter conditions is on a clock measured in single-digit hours. This is the math that Japanese mountain rescue understands, and it is the math that shaped every decision during the Asahidake search. The teams knew, by the time they reached the upper station the next morning, that the survival window had already closed. They proceeded anyway. They proceeded because of the small possibility that Tevel had found shelter, that she had reached a hut, that some terrain feature had given her protection from the wind. They proceeded because hope is operationally required, even when the statistics are against it. They did not find her in time because there was no in time to find her in. The time had already passed. The Daisetsuzan National Park, where Asahidake stands, covers an area of more than 770 square miles in central Hokkaido. It is, by Japanese standards, vast. It is home to brown bears in summer, to wind-sculpted snowfields in winter, to volcanic vents that hiss steam from frozen ground. The Ainu, the indigenous people of Hokkaido, called these mountains the playground of the gods. The phrase, translated into the contemporary language of mountain risk, captures something true. These are peaks that in winter do not accommodate human plans. Japanese mountain rescue, the Keisatsu Sangaku Kyujotai of the Hokkaido Regional Police, is a specialized unit trained for exactly this kind of environment. The members are themselves experienced winter mountaineers. They understand the conditions intimately. Their training includes scenarios in which the rescuers themselves can become casualties if they push too hard. They have, in their organizational memory, the names of their own colleagues who have died on these slopes during rescue attempts. They are cautious for reasons that they have, in the most literal sense, earned. After the Shabtai recovery, the team gave a press briefing in Asahikawa, in which the senior commander said in carefully measured Japanese that the operation had been textbook by every metric they could measure, and that the textbook had not been enough. He used the word zanen, regret. He said it twice. The recovery of Tevel, when it happened, was carried out under conditions that allowed the volunteer team to operate safely. The body was lowered by stretcher to the ropeway station. From there, by the regular cable car, down to the base. Japanese authorities issued a statement of condolence. The Israeli Foreign Ministry coordinated repatriation. The case was, by the standards of cross-border missing person incidents, handled with respect and with care. None of that returned her. Consider the calculation that the Japanese rescuers must have made, hour by hour, as the search progressed. They knew the math. They knew that each passing hour without a sighting reduced the probability of recovery from rescue to recovery from a body retrieval. They could not say this publicly during the active search because the family was watching. They had to keep going, but internally, every member of that team understood what the clock was doing. They understood it from the first night, when the winds at the upper station made the initial search impossible. This case adds the variable of timing to the pattern in a way that the other cases do not, because here the limit was not methodology, not coordination, not terrain in any of the senses we have so far described. The limit was atmospheric. The cold itself was the dead corner. The dead corner was not a place. It was a duration. The fix Tevel left, the ticket scan at the ropeway, was as precise as any fix in this entire investigation. The Japanese authorities knew within yards where she had begun. The peak itself is not large. By the scale of, say, the New Zealand Alps or the Pyrenees, it is one mountain. It rises from a base elevation that is itself well above the surrounding plain. And still, the weather was an absolute barrier. The fix did not matter, because no team could safely operate in the conditions that mattered. The search was governed not by the searcher's will, but by what the air would allow. When the wind dropped, they climbed. When it rose, they retreated. And during the retreats, Tevel ran out of time. The Japanese system is exceptionally well organized. Mountain rescue in Japan is professional, equipped, and experienced. None of those qualities can override weather. None of those qualities can extend a survival window beyond what the cold allows. And the cold, in January on Asahidake, allows very little. This brings me to a case that, on its surface, looks different from everything we have so far considered. The terrain is summer alpine, not winter. The country is New Zealand, not Japan. The hiker was, by every reasonable measure, exactly the right person to be doing exactly what he was doing. And yet the body, when it was found, was not where anyone expected it to be. Connor Purvis was 30 years old. He was British by birth, and he had moved to New Zealand for the kind of life that New Zealand draws particular people toward. Long walks, high peaks, cold rivers, empty valleys. He had become, in the small mountaineering community of the South Island, a known and respected figure. He had climbed in the Southern Alps for several years. He knew the Otago backcountry well. In late January of 2025, he set out on a planned solo route. The objective was Mount Huxley, a peak in the Hunter Valley region of the South Island, rising to roughly 8,200 feet. The plan, which he had shared with friends, was to climb Huxley and exit via the Huxley River South Branch, a remote drainage that runs east toward Lake Hawea. The route was technical, but not extreme. For a hiker of his level, it was within the normal range of solo objectives in New Zealand alpine country. When he did not return on his expected date, friends raised the alarm. New Zealand police initiated a search. Landsare, the country's volunteer search and rescue organization, mobilized teams. Helicopters from regional rescue services were dispatched. The weather in the Huxley region in late summer is variable, but typically allows for aerial searching. The search lasted several days. The body was located high on the southern aspect of Mount Huxley, well above the valley floor. The recovery team, working under difficult conditions, extracted Connor and returned him to his family. The exact circumstances of his death have not been made public in detail, in accordance with the family's wishes, but the location indicates that Connor had been on the mountain itself, at altitude, when he died. He had not reached the valley exit. The Huxley River South Branch, which he had planned to descend, lay below the place where he was found. What stands out about this case, and what distinguishes it from the others I have described, is that the location of the body changed the implied story. Connor had told friends his route. They believed they knew where he would be. They believed the danger zone was on the descent, on the technical sections of the river drainage, on the lower slopes where solo hikers in that area have come into trouble before. They directed initial search efforts toward those zones. He was not in those zones. He was higher, in a place that was within the search area only by virtue of being on the mountain at all, but not in the part of the mountain that the original information had pointed toward. This is a particular variation of the pattern that I think is worth naming. The information you give before you disappear is not always accurate to where you end up. Connor's plan was a hypothesis about his future movements. He had every intention of executing that plan, but the mountain does not always allow the plan to be executed. He had gone somewhere on Mount Huxley that he had not originally intended to be. Whether he had been forced there by weather, by route conditions, by an error in judgment, by an unexpected hazard, no one can say with certainty. What this means for searchers is sobering. Even when the missing person has been responsible, has shared a route, has told friends and family what to expect, the route they actually walked may diverge from the route they planned. The fix they left behind, in this case the verbal communication of an intended itinerary, was not where they were. When you compound this with the dead corners, the proximity blindness, the scent dispersal, the canopy cover, the angles of light, the limits of helicopter sweeps, you begin to see why the pattern repeats. The fix is unreliable. The terrain is uncooperative. The search is bounded in time. The probability that all three of these will align in the missing person's favor is, statistically, not as high as people assume. It is not as high as the signs at the trailhead suggest. What follows is a different category of failure again. Not a plan that diverged from reality. Not a body in a fold of cliff. A vanishing in a landscape that, from a distance, looks like it could not possibly conceal anyone, and that, on closer inspection, has been concealing people for centuries. In April of 2023, a man named Finn Creaney, a young hiker in his early 30s, was traveling in the far north of Scotland, in the county of Sutherland, an area sometimes called the last great wilderness of the British Isles. He was, by all reports, an experienced walker. He had hiked in the highlands before. He understood the conditions. He understood the seriousness of the terrain. He was dropped off by a contact who had driven him from elsewhere in Scotland at a location near Loch Naver. The exact drop point has been described in police statements as a roadside spot on the route between the village of Altnahara and the Loch. From there, Finn intended to begin a long walking route into the interior of Sutherland, a region characterized by peat bog, low hills, lochans, and great stretches of empty country where no road runs for dozens of miles. The drop-off is the last confirmed sighting. The driver saw him walk away from the road, pack on his back, in the direction of the loch. When Finn did not make contact with family within the expected window, the alarm was raised. Police Scotland coordinated a search. The Northern Constabulary called in mountain rescue teams from across the Highlands. The Coast Guard, which in Scotland has jurisdiction over a surprising range of inland search operations, provided helicopter support. Specialist water search teams examined the loch. Cadaver dogs worked the shoreline and the moorland to the south. The teams involved are worth naming because the structure of Scottish search and rescue is unusual and worth understanding. Scottish Mountain Rescue is a coordinating body for 25 individual volunteer teams distributed across the country. The teams are unpaid. The members buy most of their own equipment. They train at their own expense. The team most often deployed in northern Sutherland is the Ascent Mountain Rescue Team, based in the village of Lochinver, more than 70 miles from the Loch Naver drop-off point. The Ascent team responded. So did teams from Dundonell, from Torridon, from Kintail, from Cairngorm. Each team travels in its own vehicles, with its own equipment. The coordination of multiple teams across that geography, in conditions of poor weather and limited road access, is itself a substantial operation. Add in the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency helicopter operating out of Inverness or Stornoway, the police search advisors, the dog handlers brought up from southern Scotland, and you have, on any given day of active search, perhaps 60 to 80 trained personnel in the field. They did not find him. The search went on for an extended period. It was, by Scottish standards, well-resourced. The terrain, however, is the kind of terrain that defeats searching in particular ways. Peat bog absorbs scent. The surface of a highland moor in April is patterned with countless small pools, ditches, and hummocks, any one of which could conceal a fallen person. The water in the lochans is dark, peat-stained, and in many places deeper than a casual observer would expect. Visibility from the air, in good weather, is acceptable. In typical Highland weather, it is poor. After many weeks, the active search was scaled down. The case remains open. Finn has not been found. The official position of Police Scotland, last I checked, is that he is still listed as missing. His family continues to advocate for renewed searching. Independent volunteers have, periodically, returned to the area to look. There is something specific about the Highland landscape worth naming. It is not, in any single feature, particularly difficult. The hills are not high. The cliffs are not large. The rivers are not wide. What makes the Highlands lethal as a search environment is the cumulative effect of all of its features at once. Bog, plus poor light, plus wind, plus distance from any road, plus the absence of any signal infrastructure. A walker who steps into a bog in the wrong place can be invisible within minutes. The body is below the surface of vegetation that closes over it. From the air you see grass and water. You do not see a person. I have walked in Sutherland. I will not pretend I know the exact spot where Finn was last seen, but I have walked country very much like it. You stand on a low ridge and you look out at a landscape that to a non-Highlander looks like nothing. No villages, no roads, no trees. Brown and green and gray, with a few darker patches of water. It looks like you could walk across it in any direction. The truth is, you cannot. The bog grabs your boots. The lochans force constant detours. The peat hags, the deep cuts in the surface, drop 3 to 6 feet with a vertical face, and you do not see them until you are at the edge. A man could lie at the bottom of a peat hag, 30 feet from where a searcher passes, and be invisible to that searcher. The Highland search for Finn was thorough by every reasonable standard. It was also, like the Highland landscape itself, defeated by the cumulative property of small features. Each small feature is innocuous. Together they form an environment where a person who steps off the line of their planned route, even by a short distance, may not be recoverable. His family has not given up. They have, in fact, become one of the more visible advocacy presences in the Scottish missing person community. They have organized return search weekends, in which volunteers travel from across the United Kingdom to walk specific transects of the Lochnaver area under the coordination of an independent search consultant. They have raised money for ground-penetrating radar surveys of specific high-probability bog sections. They have engaged with the Locate International charity, a volunteer organization staffed largely by former police officers and military personnel who reinvestigate cold missing person cases on a pro bono basis. The Locate International review of the Creaney case produced a report that, while not made fully public, identified several specific terrain features within the original search area that had not received close ground inspection. Volunteers have, in subsequent weekends, walked those features. They have, so far, produced nothing. There is a particular paradox about Scottish bog worth describing, because it sits at the heart of why the Highland landscape is, statistically, one of the more difficult recovery environments in Europe. Scottish peat is, in chemical and biological terms, a preservative. The bogs of northern Scotland and Ireland have, over the centuries, yielded what archaeologists call bog bodies. Human remains so well preserved by the acid and oxygen-poor conditions of the peat that facial features, hair, clothing, and even the contents of stomachs have survived for 1,000 to 4,000 years. The most famous of these, Tolland Man in Denmark, Lindow Man in England, others in Ireland and Scotland, are studied in detail in museums across Northern Europe. What this means for a contemporary missing person case is that the peat that potentially holds Finn Creaney, if he indeed entered the bog at some point on his walk, is the same peat that has, in other places, preserved human bodies for millennia. If he is in the bog, he is, in physical terms, still there. The peat has not consumed him in the way that a forest decomposes a body. The peat has, on the contrary, held him in a kind of suspended state, below the surface, in a condition that ground-penetrating radar can, in theory, detect. Yet the practical limits of ground-penetrating radar in highland conditions are severe. The instrument requires the operator to walk specific transects at slow speed, over surfaces that are themselves difficult to walk. A single search team can cover perhaps 10 to 15 acres of bog in a working day, if conditions allow. The Sutherland region where Finn was last seen contains tens of thousands of acres of bog, much of it inaccessible by vehicle, distributed across terrain that requires logistical support, daylight, and weather windows. To search the entire potential bog area with ground-penetrating radar would require resources that no Scottish police force has available for any single missing person case. The technology exists. The application of the technology at scale does not. Police Scotland publishes each year a statistical summary of missing person cases in the country. The numbers from the Highlands and Islands Division specifically are sobering. In an average year, the division receives several thousand missing person reports, of which the substantial majority are resolved within hours, usually by the person returning home, or being located in a known location. A smaller number, perhaps a few hundred, require active search. A still smaller number, in the single digits annually, become long-term unresolved cases. Over the past decade, the cumulative list of unresolved long-term cases in the Highlands has grown to a number that Internal Police Scotland reviews have begun to flag as a pattern. The cases share a profile: experienced or semi-experienced walker, solo, remote landscape, strong initial fix in the form of a drop-off point, a parked car, a planned route, initial search of significant scale, no recovery. Eventually, after a few years, a quiet movement of the case file into a different category, where it remains officially open but operationally dormant. Finn's case is, sadly, not unique in this profile. It is the most recent of several similar cases in northern Scotland. The fix Finn left, the drop-off point, the witness of the driver, the direction of travel, the planned route, was as good a fix as a long-distance solo hiker can leave. It hasn't been enough. Now to the hardest case. The case I have placed last is not the most dramatic. It is the most enduring. It is the one where the silence has now lasted longest, and where the family has refused to let the silence settle. In April of 2018, a 20-year-old German woman named Scarlett Salice set out for a walk in the Schluchtensteig, a long-distance trail through the southern part of the Black Forest in the German state of Baden-Württemberg. The Schluchtensteig is a well-established hiking route. It runs for over 60 miles, through gorges and over wooded ridges, past waterfalls and small villages, in a landscape that has been walked, mapped, and remapped for centuries. It is among the most carefully documented hiking environments in Europe. The Black Forest does not have wilderness in the sense that Tasmania or Sutherland have wilderness. It has, instead, a dense network of marked trails, forest roads, villages, and managed forestry land. Scarlett was 20. She was beginning what should have been the first stage of an independent young adult life. She loved the outdoors. She had walked sections of German trails before. The Schluchtensteig was, for her, a step up in commitment, but not in difficulty. The trail is signed. The maps are accurate. The villages along the way offer accommodation. By every external metric, it was a safe undertaking. She entered the trail. The exact point of entry has been reported by German media as being in the southern section, near one of the major access points used by hikers. She did not complete the route. She did not check in at any of the planned accommodations. She did not contact her family. The alarm was raised when she failed to make contact at the time she had promised. German police, the local fire brigades, search and rescue volunteers, and Forest Service personnel began a search. The area covered by the search was, in scale, enormous. The Black Forest is not one forest. It is a region. The Schluchtensteig alone passes through dozens of municipal districts. Coordinating a search across that geography is a logistical task that the German authorities took on with characteristic thoroughness. Helicopters flew. Dogs worked sections of the trail. Forest workers reported anything unusual they found in their normal duties. The family, through German media, made appeals for any information. Nothing definitive emerged. In the weeks and months that followed, the case attracted significant attention in southern Germany. Volunteers organized themselves. Independent search efforts were mounted. Drones flew over sections of the forest that had received limited attention in the official search. The family hired private investigators. The investigators worked alongside the police, not in opposition to them, examining sections of trail that had received only cursory attention, interviewing local residents in villages along the route, gathering reports from forestry workers who knew the lesser-used paths. A year passed, then 2, then 3. Each anniversary brought renewed coverage in the German press. New campaigns were launched by the family. New witnesses were sought. New sections of forest were searched. The fundamental fact, however, did not change. Scarlett had not been found. Her father became, in the years following her disappearance, a recognizable figure in the German missing persons community. He gave interviews. He pushed for legislative changes regarding how missing person cases involving adults are prioritized in German policing. He worked with the families of other long-term missing persons in southern Germany, of whom there are, sadly, several. The Black Forest, despite its trafficked appearance, has accumulated a list of unresolved disappearances over the decades that German police have begun, in recent years, to examine collectively, looking for patterns. The German police themselves have published periodic statements emphasizing that the case remains active. They have invited members of the public to come forward with any information, however small. They have asked hikers using the Schluchtensteig to keep an eye out for anything that might be relevant. There is a reward, posted by the family, for substantive information leading to a recovery. Now, more than 5 years after she walked into the Schluchtensteig, she remains missing. The case is still officially open. The German police have not closed the file. The family has not stopped looking. There is, periodically, a new piece of information that surfaces. A tip from someone who walked the trail that week. A recollection from another hiker that perhaps a young woman matching her description had been seen at a particular spot. None of these tips has yet produced her. This is the case that, to me, anchors the pattern most firmly, because the Black Forest is, in many respects, the opposite of the Tarkine or the Sutherland Moor. It is small. It is densely trafficked. It is well mapped. It is surrounded by infrastructure. A person who steps off the Schluchtensteig is rarely more than half a mile to a mile from a forest road, a logging track, a farmhouse, a village. The probability of being found by a passing walker, by a forester, by a hunter, by a child, is in theory high. And yet 5 years have passed, and no one has walked past her. What this tells me is that even in the most densely human terrain available to a hiker in Europe, the gap between the fix and the recovery can become permanent. The signal Scarlett left was strong. The investment in finding her has been substantial. The forest is not vast. The terrain is not extreme. And still the same pattern, the same gap, expressed differently than in Sutherland or Tasmania, has held. There is a particular thing the German police have said in their public statements about the case that deserves your attention. They have said repeatedly that they cannot exclude the possibility that Scarlett is in an area that has been searched. They have said that the forest, even managed forest, contains spaces that fall through the gaps of standard search methodology. Old hunting structures, abandoned forestry buildings, depressions in the terrain hidden by recent windfall, sections of stream where a body can lodge below the surface and be invisible from above. They have not been able to clear every such space. No search can. There are too many. The German term for this kind of place, in the rescue community, is toter Raum, dead space. The same concept, in a different language, as the Swiss Totwinkel, dead corners, dead spaces, proximity blindness, scent dispersal, wind, light angles, canopy, weather windows. Each country has its own version of the same problem. Each country has names for the same thing. The names are the proof that this is not a series of isolated failures. It is a category of failure that the search and rescue profession, internationally, recognizes but cannot fully solve. Scarlett Salice walked into a forest in April of 2018. The forest is still there. The trail is still there. The signs at the trailhead still describe a beautiful long-distance hike through gentle terrain. The family is still searching. The police file is still open. The dead space, wherever it is, still holds whatever it holds. 5 years. That is the number to hold in your mind as we move to the final part of this investigation. Because the question we have to answer is not why one search failed. The question is why 10 searches in 10 countries on 4 continents, in different terrain, in different seasons, with different agencies, with different technologies, with different starting fixes, have produced, in their different ways, the same shape of outcome, either no body, or a body found too late, or a body found in a place that had already been searched, or, in the case that started this investigation, a body found 9 days after the man told the dispatcher where he was dying. I have spent the last several months reading the public records on these 10 cases. I have read the prosecutor's statement on Esther Dingley in the original French. I have read the Italian parliamentary briefing on Simon Gautier. I have read the Tasmania police media releases on Celine Cremer. I have read the Parks Canada statements on Denise Williams. I have read the Hokkaido police communications on Tevel Shabtai, translated. I have read every English-language report I could find on Connor Purvis, Aidan Roche, Finn Creaney, Natalie Christopher. I have read the German media coverage on Scarlett Salice across 5 years of anniversaries. My goal now is not to summarize what those reports say. The reports speak for themselves, and they speak well. My goal is to tell you what I see when I put them next to each other, and what I think a viewer of this investigation should take away when the screen goes dark. There are 3 hypotheses that in different forms have been offered for cases like these. Walk through each of them with me, and I will tell you what I think the evidence supports and what I think the evidence does not. The first hypothesis is the geographic trap. The idea is that certain features of certain landscapes are simply hostile to recovery. Ravines that hide bodies from aerial view, bog that swallows, snow that buries, canopy that absorbs scent, totewinkle, toter raum, dead corners, dead spaces. On this hypothesis, the failures are explained by terrain, and the lesson is that some landscapes are, in effect, traps. Once you fall in, you may not come out. The evidence supports a version of this hypothesis. Simon Gautier was in a ravine that hid him from helicopter sweeps. Celine Cremer was in a forest dense enough to mask scent for weeks. Aidan Roche was in a fold of cliff, invisible from any natural search angle. Natalie Christopher was in a small gully 1,000 feet from a road, with morning light angles that hid her from drones. The geographic trap is real. The terrain matters, but the hypothesis does not explain everything. The geographic trap on its own does not explain Denise Williams, where no body was found in a search area that, while difficult, was not exceptional. It does not explain Finn Creaney in the Highlands. It does not explain Scarlett Salice in a forest that is, by global standards, modest in size and well-trafficked. The geographic trap explains some failures. It does not explain the pattern. The second hypothesis is the coordination failure. The idea here is that searches go wrong because of organizational and procedural problems, jurisdictional confusion, premature reduction of resources, delayed initiation, poor communication between agencies, inadequate use of available technology. Under this hypothesis, the failures are mostly human and institutional. The lesson is that better procedures and better tools would close the gap. The evidence again supports some version of this. The Italian Gautier case prompted reforms to the 112 geolocation system. The Denise Williams search was scaled down after 6 days, a duration that her family has questioned. The Tevel Shabtai search was bound by weather windows that could perhaps have been used differently with better forecasting. The Celine Cremer case began only after a delay of nearly 2 weeks because no one was watching for the signal her parked car represented. But again, the hypothesis does not explain the full pattern. The Swiss search for Aidan Roche was exceptionally well coordinated, and still he was not found for 3 months. The French-Spanish search for Esther Dingley was well coordinated, well equipped, and continued for weeks with full international cooperation, and still she was not found until 8 months later, by chance, by passing hikers. The coordination failure hypothesis cannot explain the cases where the coordination was excellent. My own view, and what I believe the cumulative evidence supports, is a third hypothesis. It is the one I find most disturbing, because it does not point to a single fix. The third hypothesis is that modern search and rescue, as a system, is optimized for the wrong problem. The system is optimized for the unfixed missing person, the lost child, the wanderer with dementia, the hiker who failed to leave any indication of where they were going. For these cases, the system has developed methodologies built around expanding search radii, probability of detection calculations, and statistical modeling of where a missing person is likely to be based on terrain and behavioral patterns. These methodologies are excellent. They have saved many lives. The system is not, however, optimized for the fixed missing person, the hiker who left a precise starting point, the caller who reached 112, the selfie sender, the person whose car sits at the trailhead. For these cases, the system inherits the methodology of the unfixed case, but the fix changes the geometry. When you know roughly where the person is, you concentrate your search in a smaller area. When you concentrate in a smaller area, you cover it intensively, and you close the search faster, because if the person were in that small area, you would have found them. The logic is sound. The logic is also wrong. It is wrong because of what we have seen in case after case. The dead corner is within the search area. The proximity blind spot is within the search area. The bog hag, the small ravine, the rock fold, the snowdrift, all of them are within the area the search has covered. The search has not missed the area. The search has missed the person inside the area. And because the search has covered the area, the conclusion drawn is that the person must be elsewhere. So the search expands. So the small areas, the dead corners, the gullies that were never properly inspected on the first pass are now even further down the priority list. They get reviewed last, if at all. By the time anyone returns to them, the person inside is no longer alive. This is what I mean when I say, the system is optimized for the wrong problem. The fix is treated as a center of mass for expansion. It should be treated as a center of mass for inspection. The two approaches produce very different operations. The first approach is the one used. The second approach is the one that, I believe, the pattern of these 10 cases argues for. Look at how this difference shows up in practice. When a search team arrives at a trailhead with no fix beyond a parked car, the standard methodology is to apply a probability of area calculation. The terrain is divided into sectors. Each sector is assigned a probability that the missing person is within it, based on terrain features, the time since disappearance, the assumed behavioral profile of the subject. The sectors with the highest probability are searched first, usually outward in expanding rings or wedges from the last known point. The methodology has worked, in aggregate, well enough that it is now codified in search and rescue manuals across the developed world. It is taught at the National Association for Search and Rescue Trainings in the United States. It is the basis of similar curricula in Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and most of Europe. When the same methodology is applied to a case with a strong fix, the probability of area calculation still expands outward because the methodology assumes that a person who has been missing for several hours has moved from the fix. They may have, they often have, but in the cases I have examined, when the person has fallen or been incapacitated, they have moved very little from the fix. The expansion methodology, in those cases, pulls search resources away from the area immediately around the fix, into broader sectors, where the probability calculation says they are more likely to be. The immediate area gets a cursory inspection. The broader sectors get the bulk of the time. By the time the broader sectors are cleared, and the search returns to inspect the immediate area more carefully, the search has been running for days. The person is dead. This is the core of the argument. The methodology is not bad. It works on average. It saves lives on average. But the average hides the cases like Simon, like Natalie, like Aidan. The methodology, applied to those cases, produced the gap, and the gap killed them. I am not blaming the searchers. The men and women who fly helicopters into the Salento at night, who walk transects through the Tasmanian rainforest at dawn, who descend on ropes into ravines in the Pyrenees in winter, do not deserve criticism. They give what they can. They risk their own lives. They are, in every case I have read about, professional and committed. The criticism is of the methodology. The methodology is institutional. It is taught. It is documented. It is, in many countries, codified in formal search and rescue manuals. The methodology has not caught up with the new reality of missing person cases, which is that more and more people leave fixes before they disappear. The phone, the selfie, the GPS track, the car, the hotel departure, the dispatched call. These fixes did not exist, or existed only rarely, when modern search methodology was developed. The methodology, in its current form, does not fully use them. What would using them better look like? It would look like a presumption, not against, but in favor of, the close inspection of every feature within a defined radius of the fix. It would look like methodologies that explicitly account for proximity blindness and dead corners as priority search targets, not afterthoughts. It would look like training programs that teach searchers to fight their own instinct to expand outward, and instead to inspect repeatedly every gully and fold and depression within a tightly defined inner search area before any expansion is authorized. It would look like the use of new technologies, ground-penetrating radar in the relevant terrains, very high-resolution thermal imaging at low altitudes, repeat sweeps of the same small area at different times of day to capture different light angles, in a way that current operations do not consistently use. Some of this is being adopted. Swiss Mountain Rescue has, in recent years, increased the emphasis on close inspection of dead corners. Italian 112 has implemented advanced mobile location. The German Bundeswehr has experimented with drone swarms that fly low-altitude grids. There is progress. The progress is not yet uniform. The progress is not yet enough. A moment of direct comparison between two of these cases, because the comparison is, to me, the clearest evidence for the third hypothesis. Simon Gautier and Connor Purvis. On the surface, they look very different. Simon was a French art historian in southern Italy. Connor was a British engineer in New Zealand. Simon was on a coastal cliff walk. Connor was on an alpine peak. Simon made a phone call from the ground after his fall. Connor never called anyone. Simon was found in 9 days. Connor was found in a few days. But look at the deeper structure. In both cases, the search team had a strong starting fix. In Simon's case, the fix was the cell tower triangulation from the 112 call, refined by the description of his fall. In Connor's case, the fix was his stated route plan, shared with friends before departure. In both cases, the search began promptly. In both cases, the search applied an expansion methodology, projecting outward from the fix. In both cases, the person was found in a location that the expansion methodology had not prioritized. Simon was in a ravine inside the immediate search polygon. Connor was high on the mountain rather than in the descent zone the plan had suggested. In both cases, if the methodology had been to inspect closely first before expanding, the outcome might have been different. Simon might have lived. Connor might have been recovered faster, though in his case, the recovery time was not the cause of his death. The same methodological failure produced different consequences in two very different terrains. That is what convinces me that the failure is methodological, not local. The methodology travels. The methodology takes the failure with it. This is the actual situation, and it is the situation a viewer needs to understand. You are not in greater danger because of demons in the forest. You are in greater danger because the systems you assume protect you are calibrated for a problem set that has changed. The phone in your pocket, the car at the trailhead, the GPS watch on your wrist, all of these feel like safety. They are partial safety. They give you a starting point. They do not give you a recovery. So what do you do? I have been thinking, since I started this investigation, about Simon Gautier on that ridge in the Cilento, about the 7-minute call, about the dispatcher hearing him breathing, about the 9 days, and I have been thinking about what, specifically, would have changed the outcome for him. Not a different system, not a different methodology, not a different country. One specific object on his belt, a piece of equipment that in 2019 cost about the same as a good pair of boots. He did not have it. Most of the 10 people in this investigation did not have it. If they had, several of them would still be alive. That object, and 9 other practical recommendations derived directly from the failures we have just examined, is what the next part of this investigation is for. Spend some time with me on this section, because the previous hour has been about the failures, and the failures on their own are not useful. Useful is what you can take from the failures and apply to your own walking, your own driving, your own approach to the outdoors. None of these recommendations are dramatic. None require special equipment beyond what a serious walker should already consider. All are derived directly from what the cases I have described would have needed to produce different outcomes. First, do not rely on a single fix. The parked car at the trailhead is a fix. The selfie from the summit is a fix. The call to emergency services is a fix. Each of these, on its own, has failed. Multiple fixes at intervals dramatically improve the probability of recovery. If you are walking alone, send your location to a trusted person at intervals that you have agreed on in advance. Every 2 hours, every hour, whatever the route demands. Each new fix narrows the gap between your last known position and your current position. Each new fix turns a search from a possibility cone into a possibility line. Second, carry a personal locator beacon. If you are going anywhere, a phone signal is unreliable. A personal locator beacon, often called a PLB, transmits a distress signal on a frequency monitored by satellites worldwide. It does not depend on cell coverage. It does not depend on you being conscious enough to type. You press a button, the signal goes up. Search and rescue services in every country I have discussed will receive that signal. The beacons cost less than a good pair of boots. They last for years. They are, in remote terrain, the single most effective piece of equipment a solo walker can carry. If Simon Gautier had been carrying a PLB, the search would have been a precision recovery operation, not a 9-day cell tower triangulation. He would almost certainly have lived. Let me name specific models, because the abstraction of a beacon is harder to act on than a specific item with a specific price. The ACR Riesklink View is, as of the time of this recording, available for around $350 new. It has a small screen that displays your transmitted coordinates so you can read them aloud to a dispatcher if you happen to also have cell signal. It has no subscription fee. It runs on a battery that holds charge for years. It is registered once with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the United States, and you are done. The Garmin InReach Mini 2 is in a different category, costing around $400 plus a monthly subscription of around $15 to $35, depending on plan. But it adds two-way satellite messaging, meaning you can communicate with rescue services and with family from places where no cell signal exists, in plain text. The Spot Gen 4, at around $150 plus an annual subscription of around $200, sits between the two. For a walker who goes out a few times a year in remote country, the ACR is the simplest choice. For a walker who goes out frequently and wants two-way contact with the outside world, the Garmin is worth the subscription. Any of the three is, by an order of magnitude, more reliable than relying on a cell phone alone. Third, understand that a marked trail is not a managed space outside the path. 6 feet from the boardwalk, the rules change. If you step off, even briefly, you are in wilderness. Behave accordingly. Do not assume that the surrounding terrain has been engineered for your safety. The Aegean, the Black Forest, the Highlands, the Pyrenees, all of these have, within a few yards of their maintained trails, terrain that can kill you and hide you. The trail is a thin line of order. The rest is what it always was. Fourth, if you call an emergency service, do not assume they have your precise location. In many countries, including some in Europe, the automatic geolocation of mobile calls is still not as accurate as the public assumes. Tell the dispatcher your visible landmarks. Describe the terrain. Describe the direction you were walking before the incident. Use any GPS device or app you have to read out coordinates aloud. Do not assume the system has them. The system, in many cases, does not. Fifth, tell people not just your route, but your check-in schedule. The Denise Williams car sat at the trailhead for days before anyone became worried, because no one had been told to worry. A check-in schedule is a tripwire. If you do not check in, someone acts. Without that tripwire, the signal you left behind is silent. It does not transmit until someone notices the silence, and silence is hard to notice quickly. Sixth, if you are alone and you can choose otherwise, do not be alone. I understand this contradicts the appeal of solo hiking. I am not, in the abstract, opposed to solo hiking. I have done it. I will do it again. But every case in this investigation involved a person walking alone. None of them had a companion who could have run for help, who could have stabilized them after a fall, who could have stayed at the location while the other went for assistance. A second person is not a guarantee. A second person is a substantial increase in your probability of survival, especially in the kind of remote terrain these cases share. Seventh, train for the terrain you are in, not the terrain you have walked before. Several of the people in this investigation were experienced. They were experienced in their own home terrain. The Tarkina is not the Ardennes. Asahidaka is not the Negev. Cape Breton in October is not the Australian bush in spring. Local knowledge matters. Spend time, if you can, with someone who knows the specific terrain you are walking. Even an afternoon with a local guide can change what you notice and what you avoid. Eighth, respect winter. Winter is a different category of risk. The survival windows are measured in hours, not days. The search windows are governed by weather, not by will. If you are walking in winter conditions, the margin for error collapses. Equipment that is adequate in summer is dangerous in winter. Plans that are conservative in summer are reckless in winter. If you are not prepared to abandon the plan, do not start it. Ninth, understand what your own family or partner should do if you do not return. This is not a comfortable conversation. It is a necessary one. They should know who to call. They should know what information to provide. They should know the timeline for raising the alarm. They should know how to advocate, with persistence, for a continued search if the initial effort is reduced. Several of the cases in this investigation involved families who had to push, repeatedly, for resources to be maintained. The push works only if it is informed. Make sure your people know how to push. 10th, accept that the system has limits. This is the hardest one. We are taught by the existence of professional search and rescue, by the technology in our pockets, by the marked trails and the visitor centers and the safety briefings, that if something goes wrong, the system will catch us. The system will, sometimes. The system will not, sometimes. The 10 people in this investigation believed in the system. The system in different ways, in different countries, did not catch them. That does not mean you should not walk. That means you should walk with the understanding that you, not the system, are the first line of your own safety. Take these 10 recommendations and see what they look like in practice, because abstract advice is easy to nod at and hard to act on. Here are a few concrete scenarios, drawn from the kind of walking that an American viewer over 50 is most likely to do, with a clear picture of what these recommendations actually require. Imagine you are planning a solo day hike in a state park in the Pacific Northwest. Olympic, North Cascades, somewhere with serious terrain, but also with marked trails and reasonable cell coverage along major routes. You are an experienced walker. You have done this before. You are confident. Here is what the recommendations look like in your day. The night before, you sit down with your partner or your adult child or a trusted friend, and you tell them, you are walking the Hoh River Trail to the 5-Mile Island campsite. You will start from the trailhead at 7 in the morning. You will reach the 5-Mile Island around 9:30. You will turn around and be back at the trailhead by 1 in the afternoon. You will text them when you reach 5-Mile Island. You will text them when you are back at the trailhead. If they do not hear from you by 2 in the afternoon, they should call the Olympic National Park dispatch number, which you have already given them. You write the dispatch number on a piece of paper and you hand it to them. You do not text it. You hand it to them because phones lose information and pieces of paper do not. In your pack, alongside the water and the snacks and the rain shell, you carry a personal locator beacon. The specific model matters less than the fact of it. There are several reliable manufacturers. The cost is in the range of $200 to $300 for a basic unit, more for one with two-way messaging. The beacon does not depend on cell signal. The beacon, when activated, sends a satellite signal that reaches the United States Coast Guard, which coordinates with the National Park Service for an inland response. The response is fast. You hope you never use it. You carry it anyway. You also carry your phone with a downloaded offline map of the area. The map app does not need a cell signal once the map is loaded. Your phone has GPS even where it has no cell coverage. If you are injured and you can press a button, you can read your coordinates aloud to the beacon if it has two-way capability. Or you can have those coordinates ready for the moment you regain cell signal and can call. On the trail, you walk. You stop at viewpoints. At each major trail junction, you pause. You take a photograph of your location and you send it, if you have signal, to the trusted person. The photographs are not for your social account. They are for the case file that, if you do not return, will be assembled by people who need to know where you were when you were last seen. They will look at those photographs. They will use the timestamps. They will narrow the search. At 5-Mile Island, you have signal. You text. You are here. You are turning around. You feel fine. You start back. 2 miles from the trailhead, you slip on a wet root. You fall forward. Your right ankle twists badly. You cannot wait bare. You are alone on the trail, and the next walkers will not come past for perhaps an hour or more. This is where the recommendations meet the moment. You take a slow breath. You crawl off the trail to a position where you are not blocking other walkers. You activate your beacon. You call park dispatch on your cell phone because you have signal here. You give them your trail name and your approximate mile marker. You describe a landmark you can see, a particular bend in the river, a specific large hemlock. You tell them you have activated a personal locator beacon. They confirm receipt. They tell you that a ranger and a medical team are being dispatched. You stay where you are. You drink water. You wait. This is not a hard scenario. This is a scenario in which all of your preparation works. You will be brought out of the park within a few hours. Your ankle will be evaluated. Your partner will be relieved when they hear from you. You will have learned something about how the system, when properly engaged, actually performs. Now let me describe the same scenario without any of the preparation. You have not told anyone the specific trail. You have not given anyone a dispatch number. You have no beacon. You fall. You have cell signal. You call 911. The dispatcher is connected through your county system, not the park system. They take time to understand which park you are in, which trailhead, which trail. By the time the information reaches the park rangers, you have been on the ground for an hour. The ranger team that responds does not know which trail mile you are on. They search the trail in both directions from the most accessed trailhead. By the time they reach you, 4 hours have passed. Your ankle is more swollen than it would have been. The cold has set in. You are uncomfortable, but you are alive. You will still be brought out. But the gap between what could have happened and what did happen, in terms of your suffering, is large. That is on a day hike in a popular park with good cell coverage. Now imagine a more challenging scenario. You are a 70-year-old retired teacher. You walk regularly. You have decided to do a section of the Appalachian Trail, 3 days, hut to hut, in southern Vermont, in October. You are not a beginner. You have done this kind of trip before. You are walking alone, because your usual walk-in partner had to cancel last minute. You are an adult. You make your own decisions. You go. Here is what the recommendations require for that trip. You give your partner a written itinerary. Day 1, this trailhead to this shelter, this distance, this expected time. Day 2, this shelter to this shelter. Day 3, this shelter to this exit point. You give your partner the phone number for the Green Mountain Club, which operates the huts. You give her the phone number for Vermont State Police, who coordinate search operations in the Green Mountain National Forest. You agree on a check-in schedule. You will text or call her each evening by 7 from the hut. If you do not, she calls the Green Mountain Club first, then State Police if no information comes from the club within 30 minutes. You carry a beacon. You carry a paper map because batteries fail, and you carry a paper map even though you know the trail. You carry a whistle on a lanyard around your neck, accessible without removing your pack. You carry extra calories, more than you think you will need. You carry a small foam pad and a survival blanket, because the difference between a manageable accident and a fatal one at 70 years old in October in Vermont is often the ability to maintain core body temperature for the 8 to 12 hours it takes for help to arrive after an injury. On day 2, between the shelters, on a section of trail where you have no cell signal, you trip on a rock and you fall down a short slope off the trail. You come to a stop against a tree. You are conscious. You think your hip might be broken. You cannot stand. You are perhaps 100 feet off the trail, in a small depression that, from the trail, is partially hidden by undergrowth. Other walkers will pass on the trail later in the day. They may or may not see you. They may or may not hear you. You take stock. You blow your whistle. 3 sharp blasts, the universal distress signal. You wait. You blow again. You activate your beacon. The beacon transmits. You arrange the foam pad under you. You wrap yourself in the survival blanket. You drink some water. You eat a small amount of food. You wait. The beacon signal is received within minutes. The Coast Guard relays to Vermont State Police. State Police coordinate with the Green Mountain Club, which has rangers on the trail that week. Within an hour, a ranger has been informed of your beacon location. Within 3 hours, the ranger has reached you. Medical assessment confirms your hip is fractured. A litter team is summoned. By evening, you are at a hospital in Bennington. Without the beacon, this story ends differently. The whistle is heard by no one. You are not seen from the trail because the depression hides you. Other walkers pass. Some hear what they think might have been a sound, but they cannot place it, and they walk on. Your partner does not hear from you by 7. She calls the Green Mountain Club. The club knows you are between shelters, but does not know where. The state police are notified. A search begins the next morning, because at night in Vermont in October, no foot search in rough country is safe. You spend the night where you fell. You have your blanket. You survive the night, but only just. By the time you are found the following afternoon, you have hypothermia in addition to a fractured hip. Your recovery, both at the scene and in the months afterward, is harder than it should have been. The beacon, in this scenario, is the difference. The check-in schedule is the difference. The whistle is the difference. The pad and the blanket and the extra food are the difference. None of these items costs much. None of them weighs much. The total weight added to your pack, for all of them combined, is perhaps 800 grams. The total cost, for all of them combined, is perhaps $350, much of which is the beacon itself, which lasts for years. I describe these scenarios because the recommendations need to feel concrete, not abstract. They map onto specific actions, specific items, specific conversations, specific phone numbers written down on specific pieces of paper that you hand to a specific person before you leave. The abstraction of safety becomes safety only when it is converted into objects and habits. The same applies to the international scenarios in this investigation. Simon Gautier in the Salento would have been recovered within hours if he had been carrying a beacon. The cell triangulation problem would have been irrelevant. Esther Dingley, if she had been carrying a beacon and had activated it after her fall, even if she had survived only briefly, would have given the search teams a precise location to recover her from, weeks instead of months later. Natalie Christopher, on a short morning run, was not in a setting where carrying a beacon is conventionally expected, but a simple shared location app on her phone, broadcasting to her partner in real time, would have placed her position within yards when the partner became concerned. These are not extraordinary measures. These are routine measures that have not yet become routine. One specific concern needs addressing, because it has come up in conversations with my own family about my own walking. The concern is cost. The concern is that what I am describing requires equipment that some people cannot afford. The concern is fair. I will not pretend it is not a real factor. What I will say is this: the single most important item, the personal locator beacon, can be bought for under $300 in the United States, new, with no subscription fee. A used beacon, in good condition, can be bought for substantially less. Some park services and some outdoor clubs operate beacon rental programs for visitors who do not want to purchase. The rental fee, for a multi-day trip, is typically less than $30. There are options. The options exist. The barrier is not, in most cases, true unaffordability. The barrier is, in most cases, the perception that the equipment is not necessary. The cases in this investigation argue, in my view, that the perception is wrong. The other concern, which is harder to address, is the cultural barrier. The shame of carrying a beacon as an experienced walker. The sense that asking for help, or preparing to ask for help, is in itself a sign of insufficient skill. I understand this concern because I have felt it. I have felt it on trails where I knew I should have a beacon, and I had decided not to bring one because I had been on similar trails before, and nothing had happened. The cases I have described are the answer to that concern. The people in this investigation were not lacking in skill. They were experienced. Skill did not save them. Equipment, in some of these cases, would have. The cultural shame of carrying a beacon is, when measured against the outcomes in this investigation, a cost that should be carried, not avoided. Before I close, one more observation. Something I noticed when I laid all 10 cases out in chronological order, on a map, with the search durations and the recovery distances written next to each one. The thing I noticed is that, despite the range of countries and terrains and seasons, the average distance between the last known fix and the location where the person was found, in the cases where they were found, is striking. It is consistently small. Less than half a mile in the case of Natalie Christopher. About 1.25 miles in the case of Simon Gautier. Less than half a mile in the case of Celine Cremer. Within the original search grid in the case of Aidan Roche. Off the standard descent route, but on the same mountain in the case of Esther Dingley. High on Mount Huxley itself in the case of Connor Purvis. In none of these cases was the person far from where they were last known to be. In every case, the search did extend over the area where they were. The distance was not the problem. The thoroughness of the inspection within the distance was the problem. When I look at that pattern, I see something that should change how we think about wilderness risk. The danger is not in the long miles. The danger is in the short distances. The danger is in the dead corner 1,000 feet from the trailhead. The danger is in the gully behind the hotel. The danger is in the fold of the cliff above the marked trail. The danger is in the close terrain that you walked past without seeing. The wilderness in these cases is not a vast unknown. The wilderness is the small unseen. The system is calibrated for the unknown. It is not yet calibrated for the unseen. And until it is, the gap that killed Simon and Esther and Natalie and Celine and Connor and Aidan and Tevel, and which still holds Finn and Scarlett and Denise, will continue to claim people. I do not think this requires any explanation beyond what the evidence shows. I do not think the wilderness is malevolent. I do not think the mountains have intent. I think we have built a system that assumes more about its own capabilities than the evidence supports. And I think the families of the missing have been told, repeatedly, that everything was done, when what was done was bounded by methodology, that the cases themselves have revealed to be incomplete. The reforms are coming, slowly. The Italian system has changed since Simon. The Swiss training has changed since cases like Aidan. The Greek mountain rescue community has documented the proximity blindness problem after Natalie. The Tasmanian park authorities have considered changes to trailhead notification systems after Celine. Each tragedy contributes to a small adjustment. None of them produces, on its own, a complete fix. What the 10 cases together tell me is that the fix will not come from any single country or any single agency. It will come, if it comes at all, from a broader recognition across the international search and rescue community that the modern missing person case has changed, that the fixes the missing leave behind are richer than they have ever been, and that the methodologies for using those fixes have not kept pace. That dead corners, dead spaces, dead angles, proximity blindness, and the cumulative effects of small terrain features need to be priority targets, not afterthoughts. Until that recognition is general, and until that recognition is operational, the gap will remain. If you walk, if you camp, if you run on the road outside a small hotel in a Greek village, if you take a short maintained trail to a waterfall in a Tasmanian forest, if you climb a marked path beneath an alpine face, if you cross a moor in the north of Scotland, if you train in winter on a Japanese volcano, if you summit a peak in the Pyrenees and send a photograph to someone who loves you, the fix you leave is not enough. Leave more. Leave them often. Carry the beacon. Make the check and schedule. Tell the trusted person what to do if you do not call. Inspect in your own mind the gully you just stepped past. Look back at it. The system, when you fall, will not necessarily save you. You, before you fall, can save yourself. I will keep documenting these cases. There are more in countries I have not yet covered, with the same pattern in different forms. If this investigation has been useful to you, if it has made you think about a walk you are planning or a habit you have, please share it with someone you walk with. Not because the share helps me, because the share might be the conversation that produces, in your own circle, the agreed check-in schedule that one day makes the difference between a recovery and a 5-year silence. Walk carefully. Tell people where you are. Tell them again an hour later. Do not assume that the trail you are on, however well marked, is more managed than it is. The mountains and the forests and the moors do not care about your itinerary. The people who love you do. Make their care actionable. The signal you send in the end is only as useful as the people who are listening for it. This has been Echo 7.